Welcome to Beyond Belief, Tales of Religious Exodus, where we delve into the personal journeys of people who've left fundamentalist religions. In this series, we explore their experiences within religion, their journey out, and how they found meaning and healing on the other side.
Okay, Rachel, welcome to the show. And there's a few exciting firsts on having you here. You're the only other person other than, I guess, Aviva, who, and my immediate family, who is half the episode so far, who's part of the same exact cult that I was in. I've had other Orthodox Jews, but not Aish HaTorah specifically. So it'll be cool to get like another perspective because we were raised in very similar ideologies and still never overlapped at all during our entire history until we connected a couple weeks ago, really. And then
Well,
the
we met
other
a
part
couple
is
breeds,
yeah, we've met.
but
I
we're
don't remember
geographic.
you.
Yeah.
Maybe you remember me. I
Yeah.
think it's been one way because you're a few years older than I am. And then the second aspect of this is actually that you were in more of a position of leadership than almost anybody else that I've interviewed so far. A lot of people were like on the receiving end of it,
Yeah.
but you had more, and I think that lends a really unique tone, and I'm sure it's going to come up a lot in our discussions. So those are like two firsts here. So thanks for joining.
Yeah, I'm excited. Before we get started, I asked each of my kids I told them I was coming on here, what I could share, what I couldn't share, and what they thought I should share. And my 15-year-old said, talk about being a leader. Talk about what it's like to bring people in.
Being a leader. So being a leader in the Orthodox community specifically. What leadership?
Specifically in the Aish community, in the outreach community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I wanted to actually start by taking a step back and actually discuss with you or have the conversation around what it was like for you to be on this podcast. There's maybe some initial reservations. You had to think about it a little bit. And so I'm curious, like, what was that process for you deciding to even come here today?
It's a good question. I think I've only been in the proactive deconstruction process, I should say, for the last 4 years. This is relatively new. As I've been through that process, I felt the need to talk about this publicly. And I also have kids, one of whom is still very much in that world. And so for me, there's this very big push-pull between wanting to share what's going on. People need to know what's going on. I brought so many people in. I feel like I got to go in and pull everybody out. If I really truly believe that this is a harmful cult, and I do, then I feel almost like a responsibility to help fix what I did. And on the flip side, I have a kid in it, and I'm adjacent to the world. My kids are adjacent to the world. Their dad is still religious. And so there's a certain sensitivity that I feel in this push-pull of wanting to share the story or not. But I'm sitting here. I think it's important to share.
Was there any like process that you had to go through to feel ready, or what ended up in that push pull? What ended up with you being here today? What was the process?
I think that one of the biggest things about being in a cult, in a high course of control, is that you are taught to distrust your internal guide, your internal voice and your gut. And one of the biggest reclaimings for me has been to trust what my body tells me, what my gut is telling me, and not to do things that I'm not ready to do. Because that's everything that you do is about what the cult is telling you to do and not what you want to do. And so for me, it was more a matter of, I reconnected with you a while back, said I should come on and didn't. And then there was just a gentle knowing in me that was like, I'm ready to go. So I'm just following that. I don't have a more intellectual answer for you.
Perfect. So it was this sort of felt sense that now you were ready.
Yeah, feel good.
Amazing. Awesome. Glad to have you. Well, I know there's some specific topics to dive into, but let's start with the broad strokes of your specific upbringing and what it was like, where and when and how, all of that usual good stuff, the context.
Yeah. I was born in Israel to Canadian parents who became religious in their late 20s. They moved to Israel as idealists. This is where the Jewish people belong. And so they moved there. I'm the second of 6 kids. My parents had to play a little bit catch up because they started having kids in their late 20s. So my mom had 6 of us in 7 years. So we're all the same age. I thought that was normal. And I grew up in Hernov, which is a very Anglo, very Haredi. Haredi is ultra-Orthodox religious neighborhood. So I would say that most of my life was spent in English around Anglo culture in Israel. So just to jump around, I'm very bad at doing linear, but to jump around, in Israel, I never fully felt Israeli. But then out of Israel, I didn't feel Canadian. And then back in Israel, I feel like I don't really come from anywhere and I come from everywhere. My parents got involved in Aish, in Jewish outreach. They became religious that way. They got involved in it pretty quickly when they moved to Israel. And so I grew up in an outreach. I would say that most of my life, although I was ultra Orthodox my whole life, most of the socializing I did was with the greater Jewish community. Aside from my school friends and my school time, all of the socializing that happened at home on Shabbat, after school, was really in the greater Jewish community. And I was part of a house that was like proudly Jewish. This is who we are. We got to teach the world. We got to share it to the world, the beauty of this. We moved to Toronto when I was 12. And so I spent my junior high school years in Toronto at Beis Yaakov, which is as ultra Orthodox as it gets. Graduated in Toronto. Also grew up with like, in Toronto, my mom would cry that she didn't live in Israel. So I very much grew up with Israel as the center, as our home. And the only reason we're not there is because we're doing God's holy work. We moved to Toronto to work with an Aish branch in Toronto, the famous Lori Platnick. If anybody has any connection to Aish, that was who brought us in. After my parents brought her in, I'll keep it in the family. So I went back to Israel after high school. Most Orthodox kids do a year abroad in Israel to study religious studies. So I did that. And then got married at the end of that year, like a good Jewish girl. So I got married at 18 to an up-and-coming Kiruv rabbi, professional outreach rabbi, and had a couple kids in Israel, moved to Minneapolis to work for an Aish branch there, had a couple kids there, moved to Toronto to work for a different outreach branch. And then we've been in Michigan for 10 years. We moved here to work for the local Aish branch here. And I had another kid.
Mhm. Okay. Wow. Okay. So taking a step back to childhood, and again, very similar, like I also felt very much like I didn't belong. I more so belong in North America, but I still have like Israeli things that make me not belong, especially Canada is actually worse for me than the United States as far as belonging. But growing up in this sort of dual household, what was that like? The type of ultra Orthodox that we were raised, walked this line between two things. And you alluded that you want to talk about two different cults, the
Yeah.
broader Orthodox Judaism and Asian specific. And so we can maybe start opening that a little bit with what was it like to be between those two worlds? Like, I never met you we were young. So
Yeah.
when you were 12, I was like 10, but Aish did not do a great job of creating a sense of community, which is like one of the things that religion is supposed to do.
Right.
And so I never met you. I didn't know about you. I know about the one Aish family that lived down the street, the Schwartzes, and that was about it. So was there a lot of Aish in your life at that time? And how did that juxtapose with the Haredi, broader Israel?
It's a really important question, I think, in my story. Back when my parents were involved in outreach, it wasn't the hip thing to do. So I was automatically othered in my existence. Less so in Israel because I was younger, so it didn't come up socially in the same way. I think the bigger challenge for me in the dual world is that I grew up in Beis Yaakov in Beis Yaakov system, super religious. Like I wasn't allowed to wear a denim skirt. Our skirts couldn't be too long because God forbid, couldn't be what they called street girls. And the street girls we weren't supposed to be like were the modern Orthodox Mamad kids. And my cousins who lived in the same building as me were part of that world. Like I said, when I grew up like in the ultra Orthodox world, my social life wasn't that. My cousins were part of this world that we literally had a talk by the teacher saying you're not allowed to interact with these kids because they went to mixed school and they talked about like, I don't know, math. And so I from as long as I can remember, I always knew that there was something different about me. And I tried really hard to do all the things right, like to be the best version at Beis Yaakov and to be the best version at home. So there was definitely a sense of like feeling parts of two worlds. But the Aish world, I very, very much was a part of the Aish world as a kid. I remember Rav Noah Weinberg, who started Aish, who I have lots to say about. I met him numerous times as a kid because my dad worked in the old city. And so we would go visit him all the time. I would get to, we go to the Kotel, the Western Wall, and then we would go visit my dad in his office, the Aish offices, and hang out with all the guys. I knew your parents well as a kid and all the guys in there. And so Aish, and then we never had Aish boys at our house, which was because we had me and my older sister are the two oldest. Because my parents had girls, they didn't want boys at the table. So we had mostly girls from the school, like the Aish equivalents for women, Neve and Midrash Rahal, through our house. So we didn't really interact with the students at Aish so much, but definitely I felt like I very much felt comfortable in the Aish offices with the Aish staff and very much felt connected and a part of that world. but it was like a completely different world from my school life. Like I felt like I literally really lived two separate lives for sure.
Was it difficult that it was so misaligned from your school life?
In Israel, it wasn't at all. When we moved to Toronto, that's when it started to be very glaring. I realized how
Right.
different my parents were from other parents. We lived just outside the religious community. In Toronto, we lived just outside of the religious community. So people would be like, "Oh, you live downtown?" I'm like, "No, I live walking distance to school, just in the wrong direction." And it wasn't cool that my parents were on outreach because we were like exposed to secular people. And so in Toronto, I definitely felt like there was something not good enough about me. And I think I leaned into being a nonconformist and into my weirdness on one hand, but was deeply religious and leaned into the letter of the law and not the spirit of the law, if that makes sense. And I can expand more on that. I'm sure it'll come up again.
For sure. It's interesting because Israel is objectively, not objectively, arguably more fanatic broadly, and yet you experience more alienation with the American Orthodox or North American Orthodox. And would you attribute part of that to like age? Like it becomes more relevant, more salient in your teens?
I think it's just because I realized the difference. I think that it was very alienate. It was very fanatical in Israel, but I was too young to really understand what that meant. And then, and there wasn't a lot of bring your parents to school. Like Israel's very not like that. Whereas in Toronto, we had like a mother-daughter brunch and my mom like didn't wear a suit. And I thought, and she looked like a hippie. And I was like, don't, you're going to more like you, I had to dress her for it because she looked weird. And people knew about what we did, like what my parents did. They knew where I lived. Like I was, whereas in Harnos in Israel, I lived literally like in the heart of the community. I lived across the street from the school. So I guess in Israel, Aish was like my dad's job. And in Toronto, it was my family life in a much more
Yeah,
significant way.
a bigger identity.
Yeah.
I remember my mother, my parents were so clueless about how to navigate Orthodox Jewish life, and my mother would clomp over to school, which is across the street from my
Yeah.
house, in her inimitable fashion style of riding boots and like a bandana, and she would just and start shouting at the teacher, a male rabbi,
Yeah.
in broken English using the feminine pronouns
Right.
because she needed something, and it was mortifying. It's like
It's
just
more
so
concerning as a kid.
obviously, yeah. She would wear berets. It was so out of left field compared to every other parent in the school,
Yeah.
and I was like, just rubbing that point home of how different I was. So yeah, I relate a lot to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was it like?
There was also an element of
Yeah,
like deep resent when it became fashionable for my generation to go into outreach and all my peers were doing it. And I was like, who the fuck do you think you are? Like, you literally worked me so hard as a kid and now you're like doing the thing. There was a lot of like resent that I had in that.
yeah,
And it
I'm
became the
sure.
cool, hip thing for an Orthodox couple to do. And all of a sudden, everybody was doing the cool thing. And I was like, no, I did this thing. I was the OG. Don't.
I wasn't super aware of that because I was never tuned enough to the regular Orthodox community to know that, but that tracks with some what I've seen. Yeah, we were such outsiders, even by Orthodox community standards.
Yes.
What was this is worth touching upon. I don't always ask this, but what was your parents' relationship with religion, especially at the time? I know it's evolved a bit.
Yeah. So it's funny that you asked that because for so many years, when people would ask me about myself, I would always tell my parents' story. I didn't think there was anything interesting enough about me to talk about. And so I would tell the story of how my parents became religious. It was a very important theme in my home growing up. It was a very big piece of my buying into the identity because they were vocal about their reasoning. I also like sitting at a Shabbos table with every single week with new people. Like in Israel, it's like a Grand Central Station of new people. So there was always somebody new to hear the story. So I just heard their story over and over again and just assimilated it. My dad approached, so I'm going to tell you the way I saw it and told it growing up, and then I can pick it apart on how I see it now. My dad approached it from a very intellectual perspective. He did a program in Israel called Witches as a secular Jew and dormed with a family in Arad, a secular Israeli family. And at the end, they said, you should come join us in the late 70s. They said, you should move to Israel. And he asked why. And they said, because help build the Jewish people, the land of Israel. And he said, so he says to the guy, let me ask you a question. He said, if there was a Druze Israeli soldier drowning and fat American tourist drowning, who would you save? When the guy said he would save the Druze because he's helping build Israel, he goes, so you're saying that me being Jewish actually doesn't matter. And he left. And he went back to Toronto. And that's where he met Sean Schwartz. The Schwartzes, the other, I don't know which Schwartz, as you were referring to in the Old City, but one of the brothers. And can I use your apartment for a class? And he got into it from an intellectual perspective of what does it mean to be Jewish. My mom got involved through my uncle, actually. One of my favorite people in the world, my gay uncle, was trying to figure out what that meant. And he got involved with Aish, pulled my aunt in, who pulled my mom in. And my mom's story, he's not religious. And like I said, he's one of my favorite people. He's instrumental in me coming out all the ways. But so my mom would always say that she was a feminist who secretly wanted to have a family. And a feminist in the late 70s, early 80s, you couldn't say that you wanted a family because that's anti-feminist. So when she found Orthodox Judaism was like the ultimate feminism, that's where she could be a true woman, celebrated for what she really wanted. So that was my parents coming to. My mom was very emotion-driven. My dad was very intellectual. He was involved in like teaching the discovery, like the Aish Recruitment and all the get people hooked and in. And he did all the intellectual understanding of like proof of God. And my mom was very like, God wants us to live in Israel. So she got on the plane, having never stepped foot there, to move, that kind of energy. So I grew up with really both towards the religion.
And what do you now understand about what was going on for them?
My dad could never do right. His dad's a Holocaust survivor. His mom came just before the Holocaust and left religion herself. And he grew up never being able to do right and wanted to be told how to live his life. Like he needed structure in order to be safe and okay. And he very much leaned into that structure and safety. And my mom was looking for a sense of belonging.
Yeah. I find it so ironic.
At least that's how we're.
Yeah, that's the
You're
concise.
listening to this, and I love you. Okay.
I find it fascinating to ever conceive of Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, as a solution to the feminism internal dilemma. So I don't know how to be a feminist. I'll do Orthodox Judaism. I find that so absurd. My mother would similarly teach Jewish feminism as, don't worry, it's still empowering. I'm a feminist too. So you're not far from that.
What was interesting about my mom's story, which what I really internalized, was she joined because she was a feminist. Like she found female empowerment in being celebrated as a woman. And honestly, as a girl who did not want any part in the male religious life, like I do not want to get up on a bima and I do not want to have to go and pray 3 times a day with a like I wanted nothing to do with that. I loved that I was a woman in a part of me loved that I was a woman in a system that didn't have to do that. And then obviously there was a huge amount of the parts that hurt me were the parts where I wasn't included as a woman. It's a very male-centered religion.
So if you happen to want to not be in the spotlight, you're golden, I suppose.
Meaning for that piece of it. Like there was a relief in, I don't have to do this part. Not,
yes,
I'm happy. So,
right.
To clarify that.
I was jealous of my siblings, my sisters, of how little they had to do and how burdened I felt by the male obligations within religion. I think their counter experience, which you'll for sure be speaking to, is how badly you get treated as a woman in Orthodox Judaism. So that's a trade-off. It's, no obligation, but you're also going to be a second-class citizen.
Yeah.
Okay. So growing up, was there any struggle already around certain religious beliefs or practices?
It's always interesting when you're looking back at your life versus when you're going through your life. And I try very hard when I tell my story to try and tell it from both lenses, because I think it's helpful in understanding how you can stay in something for so long. I think I was always a seeker. I was always very inquisitive, and I didn't like when.
Hey.
Okay. Hello? Sorry, the computer just shut down. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah. Is your computer is it like a battery thing?
No, it just shut down. It's got not wanting to turn on.
Okay. All right. We shall continue.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Is the audio fine?
It is fine actually.
Okay. Got it.
All right. So get comfy.
Yeah. Okay.
So you were saying that the last I heard was that you were always a seeker and always inquisitive.
Yeah. So I remember like as early as first grade starting to have questions where I was like, this does not make sense. I remember we were learning the Genesis, and it was talking about how God said, I'm going to misquote this, and I'm very happy about that, but about basically saying that God said to create fruit trees, should create fruit trees on the 3rd day of creation. And it said that it should be a fruit tree that bears fruit and tastes like fruit. And the tree only created fruit. And then God punished the tree. And I raised my hand and I said, how can God punish an object that has no free will? Like, The fact that the tree created apples and not taste like apples means that God did it. So God told it to do something, didn't let it do it, and then punished it. And I just thought that and the teacher looked at me like she didn't know what to do with me. And so I took it home to my dad. Oh, that's a great question. My dad was really good at giving me questions that soothed, but didn't really answer the question. I remember another one I really struggled with was like, I get polygamy, like I get having more than one wife, but like, why are you giving your servant? And I get that Rachel needed to give her servant because she didn't have any kids, but like, what the fuck was Leah doing giving her servant to Yah? What is that? And so my dad very lovingly goes, it's like surrogacy. They just didn't have surrogates at the time. And I was like, but I still don't understand why Leah feels the need to get, like, what is that? So there was definitely things from the beginning that I remember really just struggling with. And now I have language for I would put in a box and put on my shelf. And I can bore you with all the things that I started to see, but those are some significant ones that I know that remember.
Yeah. So there's a part of you that's like constantly questioning, but you're deeply bought in because, and I relate, you're getting the story every week of like how your parents, who are, of course, extremely intellectually honest, made this decision despite great odds or whatever it's framed as. So already there's an automatic buy-in. My parents did all this hard work.
I'm going to even add to that. I think there was a very strong level of indoctrination that I grew up with that was active. I remember being as little as 4, and I loved sitting on my dad's lap. I really had a really good relationship with my dad growing up. Now I maybe interpret it differently, but I remember I would sit on his lap and he would say, he was the only one who could call me Racheli. Racheli, who loves you most in the world? And I was like, I don't know, Ima, Abba, like, what am I supposed to say? So I'd always just say him. And he goes, no. And we would go through who loves you most in the world. God loves you most in the world. And he goes, how do you know that God loves you most? And he goes, because I told you. He goes, but why should you trust me? And he said, you should trust me because I don't lie to you. You know that whatever I tell you is real and I don't lie to you, so you can trust my word. And so he really like critical thinkinged me through blindly trusting what he told me. And that was the foundation of my belief for sure, alongside all the other things that you're saying of osmosis. But there was like a really active giving over of the beliefs.
And it's true, he wouldn't lie to you. The breakdown is one step earlier where he's lying to himself.
Right.
And then everything he believes
because he did tell me the truth of what he believed. Exactly.
And when that falls apart, then it's so fundamental. This is just the psychology of it. It's something that you believe from the age of 4 as was told to you, and now that's being yanked away. And so now 4-year-old self has no mooring.
So that actually fell apart for me when I was 13. It's one of those moments where looking back, I'm like, I wish I ran. And I'm envious of people who got out as early as they did. But when I was right around 13, that blind faith, that like trust in my dad wasn't adding up anymore because I had too many things on my shelf that my shelf broke. I was like, this doesn't make intellectual sense. This doesn't make sense to me. Like, why am I doing this? Meanwhile, my older sister, she's like not even 2 years older than me. I just loved her, worshiped her, wanted her to like me, all the things in sibling dynamics. She was coming into her own like real strong faith. And I was watching her have this like really beautiful deeps like of her own faith, of her own understanding and her own belief. And I didn't have that. And I was like deeply jealous. And so I did what any normal kid would do. If like she has that and I don't, so it must be bullshit and I'm out. Like, because if I don't have my own. So I remember it was like a Shabbat afternoon. I went upstairs. I'm like, if I don't believe it, I could just go turn the light on, right? Can't turn the light on Shabbat. So I go upstairs and I stood in front of that light switch for, was probably like a minute and a half, but felt like an eternity. And I couldn't turn on the light. And I thought, why can't I do it? Now with all the conditioning that we get, it's, they say the Pintele Yid in Yiddish. I learned that phrase when I moved to Toronto, like the little Jew inside. So I just thought, I can't do it. And I ran downstairs. My dad was sitting at the table learning his, not Gemara. My dad never learned Gemara. He was a philosopher and Kabbalah and all that good stuff. And I sat down, I said, prove God. I need to know that this is true. And my dad, being an intellectual, pulls out, he goes, okay. And also he was like literally the wrong person to ask or the right person to ask, depending on which angle of the story I'm telling, because he had spent his whole life, adult life, figuring this out and also teaching it. Like he was a discovery teacher, proofs of God, the codes in the Torah, all the things that the recruitment material that they used. And he loved the Ramchal. He was a Kabbalist who died in his 30s. And he opens the book, The Way of God, and it says, you need to know with 5-finger clarity that there is a God. And I thought, okay, this I can get behind. Like, you're going to give me like good intellectual knowledge. And we spent weeks talking it all out. And at the end of the month, I was fully bought in soldier of God.
Nice. So it was a success.
Exactly. Or a failure,
So
depending on which way.
yeah, so it's interesting. I think one of the interesting parts of your story is that you left relatively later,
Yeah.
right? And so if we want to maybe fast forward a bit, you got married really young, right
Mhm.
after that gap year post high school, started having kids probably fairly right away.
I
The
had a 2-month-old on my first anniversary.
There you go. You did it
Right
right.
away, exactly.
I
Wasted no
think we
time.
did the same. We had
Yeah.
exactly the same. We got pregnant. You usually have to get pregnant within like the first month and
Yeah,
9
first
months of
month.
gestation. And yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So exactly that. You're right on time. And then the rest is history. But what is that history, right? So what was
Yeah.
it like for you to be the wife of a rabbi? Fun fact, the person who ordained your husband at the time was the same person who ordained me. So we
Yes.
have that in common as well.
We
I
do.
went to the same institution a few years later.
Oh, my dad and my dad, who did it with your uncle. They got their
Yes.
smicha together.
Who also is the same rabbi who taught which uncle
Ken.
was with Ken? Yeah. So
Yeah.
my father was probably just a few years behind, also got ordained by him.
Yeah.
So I was the next generation and you're
Yes.
the next generation.
Yeah.
So yeah, what was it like doing the wifely duties and the religious duties of outreach? You're playing that role. What was going on?
It's a very open-ended question, so I guess I'll just talk, and then you can pull on whatever thread you want. What was that like? There was a certain, there's expectations of roles that I worked very hard to fit into. So first of all, I wanted to marry a rabbi. Like, I wanted to marry somebody who was going to be in outreach. I was going to go save the world, and I needed somebody who was on board. So in terms of like values and alignment, I was like committed to the mission. This was exciting for me. This is what I wanted. We spent the first 3 years married in Israel while he got his smicha, his rabbinic ordination, and I got trained as a kiruv professional, which kind of felt like child's play to me because I grew up in this. I'd been doing this my whole life. Because in Toronto, what I didn't share as a teenager in Toronto, my parents were involved in the first outreach center that was based around a shul concept, around a synagogue concept, so that all the learning happened on Saturday. And I worked in the kids program. So and all of the shul kids I was friends with, I was the Rebbitzin for the teens, essentially. I'd been training for this my whole life. So I did the training, and then we got our first job in Minneapolis. I was 22 with 2 babies. And it was hard. It was harder than I thought it would be because there was a part of me that just didn't like recruiting. I eventually started calling myself a reactive influencer because I can influence the hell out of you, but I'm not going to find you to influence you. If you come to me and ask me about a topic, I'll convince you. But I didn't like looking for people. That felt really uncomfortable and wrong to me. Like, why am I going to go mess with people's lives? At the same time, believing that, like, how could I not? This is really the most important thing in the world. And when I say the most important thing in the world, the other two very deeply indoctrinating thoughts that I grew up with that were active were, and you'll be familiar with this growing up in the Aish world, that there's a bigger Holocaust happening to the Jews through assimilation than happened in Europe from the Nazis. And we have to save the Jewish people. And if you're not part of a solution, you're part of the problem. We got to pull these people off the trains. And I deeply attached to that idea that my only worth was in saving the Jewish people. So I passionately wanted to do that. And it was also really uncomfortable and stretched me in ways that I didn't love. I loved the social aspect. I loved connecting with women and people. I loved hosting Shabbos, feeding people food is my love language. So there was parts of it that really resonated with who I was inside, and parts that were really uncomfy that I just had to push through. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. One thing that I was curious about is that seemingly that wasn't something you'd encountered until then. You grew up in a household that was full of this Jewish outreach. I call it evangelizing, basically.
Yeah.
It's like a common denominator.
I tell people I was a
Christianity.
Jewish missionary.
Yeah, exactly. I say I was raised evangelical Jewish just
Yeah.
because it's a shorthand for kind of what we were doing. Seemingly, there was no pressure then to do much, I guess, recruiting. Is that because you were always like passively in that environment, but now it was your job, you're getting
Yeah,
paid to go out
for
there
sure.
and
Yeah. The
deliver
people
numbers?
were just always there versus I got to go make cold calls and convince people to come to a program. Yeah, for sure. That was the outreach part. I think a bigger part of my identity, because you said being as an adult, was also just being a wife and a mother. Those were really central, important roles in my development and also in my eventual breakdown. The process of those two things.
I made a note actually to ask you. So this whole being a woman in Judaism, I think more so maybe than specifically Orthodox Judaism. What was that arc for you, right? As somebody who, is a mother many times over from a very young age and
Yeah.
all that comes with that. Should we
Yeah.
dive into that a little bit?
So we can dive in. I want to pull on two threads and you tell me which one you want to do first. I definitely being a woman in the system and then a wife specifically, also a mom. Those are two very different threads to pull on. So we can do both, but
Perfect. So I will make the choice. Let's do the woman wife
Yeah.
thing because it starts first.
yeah, I
Sometimes
would prefer that also. Yeah.
sometimes you get an entire month to be a wife without being a parent. But
10 months because
10
till the
months,
baby was
depending-
born.
Unless you count the first 40 days. Oh, no. Go on.
Okay, so being a woman in the system it's okay. I'm gonna pick the things that I love to talk about the most, and that's modesty and family purity. I think they're really good encapsulations of what it is to be a woman in the system. You grow up from a very, very, very early age as a girl needing to be modest, and whatever version you want to read, Gila Madelson's book on modesty isn't about dress, or, the more horrific ones about like Nima, where they're talking about like skirt lengths, like all of the things. There's this huge, huge energy around modesty. You talk about, I've had the pleasure of hearing your story a lot, this need to learn, right? Men have to be studying 24/7. They always, when girls in the system, it's like the same way men have learning, women have modesty. That's ours. It's the constant, it's the 24/7. It's the thing that's going to protect the Jewish people. It's the thing that's going to protect yourself and your family. It starts with just your regular covering. Your elbows need to be covered. I'll say the way I grew up, there's all different versions of this, but the basics are the elbows, the collarbone, the knees, and then the legs and toes. But depending on like, is your skirt long or is you're wearing tights or socks or whatever. Actually, fun fact, Rabbi Zeldman, your ex-father-in-law, was very inspirational into me wearing, so there's like tights that are see-through that women wear. And I found that very, very hypocritical. Like, why are you wearing tights that are see-through? That's ridiculous. So instead of taking off the tights, I was very inspired by Roy Zeldman. I studied with him how to do like cheshbon nefesh, internal accounting. I wore the 70 denier, they're called. They're like the super thick, like the bullet stockings in Jerusalem. In preparation for moving to America, I was terrified I was going to be influenced by American culture. And so I like wore those in preparation. So there's this huge, huge energy and enforcement on modesty, on how you dress, on how you look, on how you act, on how you behave. I got in trouble in 10th grade for having curly hair. There's an element of conformity to this modesty that is, I used to say there's like God's religion and then there's like religious culture, and they're very intertwined. And I had a fight with my ex-principal, with my assistant principal in 11th grade. I had curly hair that I didn't like using gel because I didn't want it to look crunchy and wet. And I didn't like having big poofy frizzy hair. So I would wear it in like really like demure half ponytails but it was curly. And at the time it wasn't in vogue to have curly hair. So I get called into the office and she says to me, I love this story because it perfectly encapsulates like, what the fuckery are we doing here with these girls? Because I go to an all-girls school and there's some male teachers, right? So we're going on this school, every year we go on this school Shabbaton, a weekend away, where we would, all the like indoctrination on off school hours. And she said to me, if you want to come, you're going to have to do something about your hair. I said, what's wrong with my hair? And she said, well, it's not tznius. Tznius is the word for modesty. And I said, what's wrong with it? And she goes, well, it's like big and curly. And so it's attractive. It's attracting attention. And I said, I was sitting in front of her, I like point to my hair. I said, where is it big and curly? Because if it's big and curly, it goes into a bun because I don't like it frizzy. So like, tell me where it's big and curly. And she goes, well, with curly hair and you have to use product, it makes it look wet. And when boys look at you with wet hair, it makes them think of you in the shower. Now, I'm sitting there like flabbergasted that this is coming out of her mouth. I'm this like naive religious girl who's not allowed to talk to boys. Actually, it was funny when I asked my kids what I should talk about. My 11-year-old said, tell them how you were a really, really rebellious teenager and you held a boy's hand once. Like, tell them that, because that's crazy. That's normal behavior. So like, we were completely separated from boys. So I was naive and innocent. And I said, so I was very surprised about that comment. And then I said to her, no, I use mousse on purpose because it doesn't look wet. And he looks at me and I said, you know what I think your problem is? I said, I think the problem is nobody in this school wears their hair curly. They either wear it in a tight bun or they straighten it. So I look different, and looking different makes you uncomfortable. So I think that's the problem. And so she just looks at me for like a good 30 seconds and goes, if you don't change your hair, you can't come. And I walked out of that office with the thought of, the only boys that are going to be there are the rabbis. Does that mean they're thinking of me naked? And I was like mortified. So it's that level of trying to like close you down, and modesty, which then extends to you're separated from boys, you're not talking to them, you're not friends with them, you're not interacting with them, you're modest, you're covered. And then you are supposed to then date and get married. And it's like, well, what do I do with that? So now I'm supposed to like talk to a boy. I remember before I went on my first date, I married the first guy I dated. My ex is the first guy I dated. He was 5 years older than me. And I remember calling my friend and going like, what do I say? What do I talk about? And she goes, just pretend he's like a boy. Just pretend he's like one of your brother's friends. Because there was no training for this. Like all of a sudden you're like supposed to now interact with the opposite sex for like, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I don't even know what color shoes I want, like. So then you get thrown into dating, which we can pull on that thread if we want at some point. Just for context, we dated for 5 weeks. We were engaged for 7. So I knew him for a full 3 months at my wedding. And then you're supposed to get naked, have sex right after you get married, from 0 to 100. And the shame that comes around covering and then all of a sudden having to be exposed and all of that. And you get like a handful of weeks of training beforehand, what sex is, and the energy around all of that training is like these laws, these family purity laws, which I know you have a question asking what fucked you up the most. These laws are the thing that probably had the biggest impact.
Yeah. Let's dive into the family purity thing because we're right on track. It's all very linear, despite your best attempts. No, it's been great. I'm curious of one thing, your context not most people aren't that open. So if I may ask, leading up to those few weeks of what they call a training where they teach you suddenly about sex, what did you know leading up to that?
So I had a very interesting education because I was a quote unquote rebellious kid. I watched movies. Some were at home, some were my friends and I, when her parents would go out of town, we'd pull the like tiny little square TV that they had to watch their parents' wedding video on. And we would go rent movies. I was exposed to an X-rated movie when I was seventh grade and didn't know exactly what it was like a BDSM one. And I was like, I don't even know what I'm watching right now. So I knew what sex was. I knew the fundamentals. I didn't know what an erection was until after I was engaged. So I had some information, but not full accurate information. So yeah, so I did, when I walked into the college classes, I did know what sex was. I knew what an orgasm was. I knew in concept, I knew the mechanics of it. And I knew like the romance of it from like romantic comedies and stuff like that.
I wanted to just ask about one thing. You've repeated several times that you were rebellious as a teenager, but nothing about what you described sounded rebellious. You described buying in at the age of 13 to like God. When you say rebellious, do you mean in the slightly broader sense of the term of, oh, you're a nonconformist?
Yes.
Or was there actually acts of rebellion? Like how did, there was one thing, how did the like holding a boy's hand once fit in to all of that?
Yeah, good question. So I was a deep believer, about in deeply believing. And also I was constantly getting pushed up against conformity. They were constantly trying to get me to conform. So they wanted me to, all the girls are wearing black pleated skirts. Why aren't you? And I was like, okay, but their skirts aren't covering their knees. And my corduroy brown skirt is like, what is that? Or there was a certain look they wanted from me. I wore long dangly earrings. Those aren't modest. They wanted certain, and I was like, but these girls aren't even praying. I am sitting here I would pray outside the classroom because I was distracted by the talking in the classroom. So I could like properly pray, but also I was wearing red shoes because I didn't like the religious culture, that conformity bullshit that they were trying to push on me didn't resonate. And so there was an element of pushback that I tried to have. I was also like a shit stirrer. I had all the true answers and like these girls around me were like just like robots. And I was like, this is not fair. They should have the truth. So I would like constantly mess with my teachers and ask them faith-based questions for my friends. I had the answers. I was lucky to have the answers. I wanted them to have the answers. I got in trouble for that a couple times. But then there were things that I did that were rebellious. Like I listened to secular music. I swore when I was in high school. And I was friends with boys, which was I didn't do anything wrong with them. I would just talk to them. I was surrounded by a lot of it. Again, like this is a big part where like living in a dual world, I was allowed to talk to boys in the here of respect, right? Like all these kids that were at our house for Shabbos, like I was encouraged to be friendly with them, but then I couldn't talk to religious boys. That was a no-no. There was this like weird like line in the sand that didn't make sense to me. My brother, who, is 13 months younger than me. So the ages of our friends very much overlapped. And so we spent a lot of time together, me and his friends and him and my friends. And so I was rebellious. So had the school found out, I would have gotten kicked out. That was a huge no-no. And then I did silly things like one of my friends who eventually were like, are we dating? I guess we are, kind of situation. Snuck into the school and left me notes in my locker. Like we were hellraisers under the, like, discreetly. So I was a little bit of when I say rebellious, I used to say when I was still religious that it was a good thing I grew up religious because my rebellion didn't go very far. Like I listened to secular music and I talked to boys like, oh no. Now I see it as a shame that I wasn't allowed to explore. So I was doing normal teenage behavior, but in the context was incredibly rebellious.
And yeah, exactly. And you mentioned you were dating someone?
Yes.
A woman?
No.
A man?
A boy.
A boy. Okay. Okay. And so he was, okay. But in a very naive, very innocent.
Like we were all friends and then we would all hang out and then they would all go home and then he would come and pick me back up again and we'd hang out again. And then we talked about a friend being jealous and all of a sudden it was like, why would she be jealous? And something like, are we dating? And it was, yeah, we are.
How did it end?
I ended it, but I ended it with a caveat. I really liked him. I mutually really liked each other. And it was the end of senior year. I was going to be going off to Israel. He was a couple years older. He was going to be going off to Israel. And I said, let's end this so that we can go find ourselves and we can have somebody like properly, it's called read the shidduch, like introduce, my parents will talk to your parents so we could formally date. And then I got engaged to someone else.
Would you, like, when it was time for you to start dating, all about 1 year later, did you consider dating him?
Yes. So I actually was not planning on dating when I did. My plan was to finish seminary and go home and figure out career prospects because I knew I wanted to marry somebody in outreach. So I figured I would have to help provide. So I wanted to go home, settle down. Seminary, the year abroad is a very big bubble where you're like surrounded by all the holiness. And I would see people, we would call it like the seminary from out, like where they would get like super religious in sem and then come home and settle down. So it made sense to me to come home and settle down and figure out where I landed. Like I felt myself get much more religious and bought in. And then I knew I needed to like see how that played out in the real world. So my plan is to come home and then we were going to reassess where we both were. Passover of that year, my dad came to visit. We were actually at your house for Shabbat and chatted with your mom. And your mom was like, called my dad a few days later and said, I have a boy for your daughter. Is she dating? So my dad asked me, and I was like, I don't want to date right now. I want to at least finish my year. And then your mom was very persistent and called my parents about once a week for 7 weeks until the end of the year. My whole thing was I was going to go and settle or whatever. But I also wasn't going to say no to exactly what I was looking for. I spent the year really figuring out what I wanted. My parents actually wrote a pamphlet called How to Marry the Right Person. The irony, they're divorced. And I used that and I was figuring, like I took the year to figure out what I wanted in a partner. So I had a very clear, somebody asked me what I was looking for. I had a very clear list. I also didn't think anybody was ever going to marry me or want me. I went because I was an outsider and because of my nonconformity, I felt like I wasn't going to make it in that system, that nobody was going to want to date me. So being wanted was definitely my downfall. So at the end of the year, right around exam time, my mom was in Israel on a mission for women, actually. And she said to me, are you interested in dating? And I said, if exactly what I'm looking for comes along, I'm not going to say no. So she said, how do you feel about me meeting a prospective someone? And I said, please weed out the weirdos. Like, I was also like 18 and like having the time of my life in Israel and didn't think anything was going to come of this. So she actually went on my first date with my ex-husband at your house on a Friday afternoon, met him, and then said to me, like, this is what I met this guy. This is what he's all about. And he ticked every thing on my list except for one. I wanted somebody who grew up in the system because being a kid of parents who didn't, I didn't want to do that to my kids. So I said, I don't want to marry a Baal Tshuva. And my ex was a Baal Tshuva. So I got pushed back on that and I reconsidered. And 3 months later, we were married.
And was it my mother also harassing your mother essentially that got?
Yeah.
to
Oh,
happen?
for sure, for sure. She was persistent. And so my parents were like, all right, we'll take it seriously. She also she recommended me to my ex's best friend and then realized that no, after talking to my parents, she's a different person. She also thought I was my sister at one point, described me very differently to my ex, that I was tall and blonde. I'm not tall and blonde.
And your sister is.
She is.
Yeah. I'm happy to hear that my mother ruined your life too. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that's another thing we
She
have in common.
yeah. She
My
plays a big part of my life.
The amount of parallels actually in our stories is crazy. Little things and big things. My partner had curly hair and had to straighten it, like little things like that.
Yeah.
Bigger things like my father was so confusing my ex and her sister
Yeah.
and suggesting the wrong person. I've heard of my mother selling people like the completely wrong thing just to make the sale, basically, about other people, not just you.
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff. With that extra context, back to, I think we're at the family purity
Yeah.
stage of things. Okay. So yeah, what comes up for you around that?
So when I was doing deconstructing around cults and trying to figure out if I had grown up in one or not, I can't remember. I think it was in Uncultured, Danielle, and I can't remember her name. And I can get you that name. It's a great book. She's a brilliant author. She grew up in the Children of God and then was in the U.S. Army, and she's an incredibly articulate person. She said, anytime they fuck with your underwear, like nobody should be involved in your underwear. And that broke something for me in like realizing what I grew up in. When anybody tells you what underwear you should be wearing, run. That's a red flag.
So I'll pause you.
Sisters.
Which other religions also mess with your underwear? Mormons, I
Mormon,
know.
the
And anybody else?
Army, the U.S. Army.
They tell you what underwear to wear?
Yeah, it's regulated.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, because then there's also opportunity to check your underwear, which is a really gross thing. There's also Sikh. They tell you what underwear. It's one of the four things is a special underwear. I don't know if they're specifically a cult, but as soon as I heard that, I went red flag. But so yeah, I can't tell you more where else they do that, but for sure I thought, oh my God, I can't, to this day, I can't wear a pair of white underwear because it's so triggering to me. So what am I talking about? The audience. Family purity is essentially connected to a woman's menstrual cycle. I'm gonna flip back and forth between telling it the way I learned it and taught it, and now how the way it felt and what it really is. This idea of anytime Jews come in contact with death, you need to repurify, right? Purity, pure and impure doesn't mean dirty and clean. It means connection and disconnection from God. Death is the biggest disconnection from God. Creation is the biggest connection to God. So when you're connected to death, you need to separate from connection. So when you get your period, that's a potential loss of life. So you're in contact with death. And so you have to disengage from the highest form of connection, which is creating life, which is having sex with your partner. So that's the premise around it.
And to be clear, that already is an apologetic spin on a very black and white verse that just says, well, a woman
don't have sex with a woman on her period. Correct.
Yeah, basically. And so already it's this whole hoity-toity, and it doesn't fit. One of my issues with that narrative is that when a woman gives birth, and she's literally just created life, and she's bleeding because
the most amount of time you're separated.
Most amount of time separated, completely unrelated to any sort of loss of life. She's literally bleeding because she just gave birth to a human.
Yes.
And then also she gets treated exactly like a menstruating lady.
Yes.
Anyway,
and interesting actually, just talk about chauvinism. When a woman has a boy versus a girl, she can get clean faster. There's a certain amount of time that you have to, even if you're not bleeding, that you're considered bleeding post-birth. And for a boy, it's shorter than for a girl.
Yeah, and you had to bring an animal sacrifice, I think, and I think there's a bigger animal sacrifice for the sin of having a daughter.
For a girl,
literally.
Yes, literally, yeah. But we're feminist.
Very feminist.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So they're basically, you follow the flow of your period. When you get your period, you have to separate. Your period lasts a minimum of 5 days, regardless of how long you're actually bleeding for. It can't last shorter than 5 days. It can go longer, but it can't be shorter than 5 days. After the 5 days, you then have to do an internal check. I will, in gory detail, describe it to you in a second. And then you spend 7 days making sure that you stay clean. And at the end of it, you dunk in the ritual bath. And then you can come back together. So essentially, it's a 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off cycle where you're having sex, not having sex. But you're not just sex, not sex. You're also completely physically separated from each other. There's a set of laws called harhakos, which means distance. And it's everything from you can't sit in the same bed to you can't sit on the same couch if it's wriggly in any sense. You can't pass things to each other. If you're sitting at the table having dinner and it's just the two of you, you have to put something weird on the table to remind you that you're in this state. You can't carry a table together. Basically, anything that might accidentally have you brush your fingers up against each other, which will obviously land you fucking, is not allowed.
Yeah, and just to add to the extremeness of this, you can't carry a baby stroller together. You cannot pass a baby
Can't
to
pass the
each other.
baby.
Can't pass the
So
baby. So
the
you
first,
find a fire hydrant and you let the baby a 3-day-old baby kind of precariously sit on a
precarious.
fire
So
hydrant.
we,
and
yeah,
then-
we flew to, the first time I flew to Australia was, my ex is from Australia. The first time we flew to Australia, so we're flying, like, it's 2 10-hour flights, 24 hours of travel with a 5-week-old, with our oldest was 5 weeks old. So I was still obviously in NIDA, is what
Menstruated.
we were called, still bleeding out of my uterus. And we couldn't pass the baby. I had to like put him down on a moving, it was awful. And then there was essentially what happened in the transition of girlhood to womanhood is you go from this like deeply modest, your body is your own and for nobody, to your body belongs to God, it belongs to your husband, it belongs to the rabbi, and it belongs to your children as a mom giving birth and breastfeeding, which was such a mind fuck. Like, I literally spent more time thinking about my vagina than anybody should ever. Am I bleeding? Am I not bleeding? Is there something coming out of it? Is there not something coming out of it? Am I having sex? Am I not having sex? Like, it was just this constant background noise in my head of what was going on with my uterus. And that was very heavy for me. Down to like sticker, like one of the laws on Shabbat is you're not allowed to make a permanent bond, which means stickers are not allowed. And pads have stickers on them. And so one of the workarounds, or diapers back in the day, like diapers had those like sticky pads. One of the workarounds, this is the level of religious I was, one of the workarounds is that if you, like any crafter knows this, if you remove the back and put it back on, the sticker is automatically less sticky. So I would literally sit before Shabbat and go through like tear my toilet paper and like check the lights and the fridge light and all the whatever, and sit there with my pads and like pre-open them, which like that was, I'm writing a book and I that was one of the first things I wrote about, because that just like, it was such like injury, like salt in the wound, whatever that phrase is. Because then when you put them back, they don't look new. And then you're just like confronted with like some rabbis telling me how to be a woman. What is happening? What is going on here? So after you finish your period, you do an internal check. There's these special little white cloths, cotton cloths called the Badika cloth that you stick around your finger, your index finger. You insert it like a tampon with your finger and swish it around. You got to get all the crevices, pull it out, make sure there's no blood left. And you do that twice a day for 7 days to make sure there's no blood. If there's anything that comes out that does have a color, there's like pure colors, impure colors, questionable colors. I have like literally a whole page of notes on the colors that can come out of your vagina. And if there's any questionable color, it has to get taken to the rabbi. I was lucky enough to be married to somebody who had rabbinic ordination in this category called Mida. And he had a tiny little magnifying glass that he would use to check. You have to wait till it's dry, and you have to be in a naturally lit room. And he would check to see if it was questionable. Occasionally it had to get taken to the rabbi. Some people also, during those clean days, you have to wear white underwear. This is where the underwear comes in, because white is the only color that can, what's called the kabel tuma, which means it could become impure. So if you wear colored underwear and you get blood on it, then you're fine. So you have to wear colored underwear when you're not in this time frame, just in case, and white underwear to make sure you're not bleeding anymore for this. A lot of people change their sheets to white. A little act of rebellion I did was I never did that. I was like, no, white underwear is bad enough. And so yeah, your underwear could go to the rabbi too if there's any spotting on it, which felt incredibly invasive. And that was one thing that I said, I will not be a part of this. If you want to take it, you take it, but I'm not calling the rabbi. I'm not getting in touch with the rabbi. I'm not getting involved.
Did he ever do the service of checking other women's underwear? He wasn't. That wasn't his.
I think like
community.
twice there was like an emergency question, and so he did, but that was not part of his thing. I think I don't know that I would have been okay with that.
Interesting. So there's already resistance there. So let's talk about parenting.
Yeah.
Which is your other main job in the world other than being a wife.
Yeah. So my parenting journey is probably the most important part of my eventual leaving. I think that, just to jump ahead a little bit, fighting for my kids gave me permission to fight for myself. Is probably the
foreshadowing.
The foreshadowing, exactly. So when I was pregnant with first of all, in Orthodox Judaism, you should be having as many children as you can. There's actual commandments. A man is supposed to have at least one boy, one girl, and then like bonus one for God. which always talk about like question marks. I'm like, how does God command you to have a boy and a girl and then controls birth? You don't get to choose what you're having. So that never made sense to me. Also, and women get drilled into them a lot, it's not a woman's commandment. It's a man's commandment. Women do it because they want to be mothers. This is what we want. So we don't need to be commanded. But we have to help our husbands fulfill their commandment, which also, by the way, a man is allowed to divorce his wife if she can't give him kids, which sounds very like royal family bullshit. Like she can't give him kids, like it takes two to tango here. But so when I was pregnant with my first, I remember thinking, first, how in the world am I bringing a child into this world? Oh, shit. All I ever wanted in life was to be a mom. I think that in some capacity I would have been a mom. So I was thrilled to have my own, but I also immediately was consumed with this world is shit. Like I remember walking by and seeing some kids fighting and I thought, oh my God, what am I doing? This world is so unfriendly. And I also realized in that moment that it was incredibly important for me to have what I called my PhD in parenting. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this right. I'm not going to irresponsibly have kids. Oh, back to like, you're supposed to have kids. Birth control is controlled by the rabbis. They get to tell you when and when you can't have them. I remember sitting with a friend of mine. She was literally sobbing. She had 2 kids under 2. She was sobbing and terrified because her 3 months of birth control was up and her husband had to go ask the rabbi for an extension of 3 months and she was afraid he was going to say no. And I remember in that moment thinking 2 things. 1, what the fuck? Women should be allowed to decide. And 2, I was incredibly, incredibly grateful to Rav Berkowitz, who is a very interesting figure in my life, where he said women should immediately go on birth control after birth and don't even talk about it until 6 months. And after 6 months, say, should I go off it? Not should I stay on it? Like, of course you should stay on it. The question is, should you get off it? And so I credit him in giving me autonomy to say, I'm not ready to have another kid, so I'm staying on. So I never actually asked permission. I had so many kids anyways. I was basically pregnant for 10 years, but so that was like a little, where I find like positives in my story of goodness. So I had my first 2 kids are back to back. They're 12 and a half months apart. And then my third pregnancy actually ended up as a stillborn. I'm gonna put a pin in that and come back to it. I want to tell that story. But I ended up having 5 kids and started realizing that, and I was actively like researching as a parent. And I was going to Torah sources at first and finding a lot of really problematic things. I remember learning that when you're trying to teach a kid to do the right thing, they do the wrong thing, you have to punish them. So if you give a kid a punishment that's too light, that's like not hard enough, they're not going to learn their lesson. They're just going to do the thing again. And then you're going to have to punish them again. And then you're just hurting your kid and you're hurting yourself and you're in this cycle of constantly punishing them. So err on the side of severity, give them a worse punishment than you think so that it knocks the behavior out of them and then everybody's good. And I remember like, I still have those notes. I'll have to go find them just for myself. I remember writing that down thinking, this is wrong. Like, this is wrong. Like, I can't do that to my kid. And so I started searching out other sources. Dr. Shafali was really instrumental. Dr. Ross Green, the Whole Brain Child, all of this. Like I started learning about child psychology and trying to understand how kids are secure attachment and all of that kind of stuff. And I started really focusing my energy on teaching my kids autonomy, teaching my kids consent. We used to play this game with my kids, the tickle game. And the game was, I tickle you and you say stop. And the second you say stop, I stop. Because your body is yours. And I became very militant about family doesn't get to hug and kiss you if you don't want it. You get to say no. So I'm like teaching my kids about consent and autonomy. And I would say to them, like, you get to say no to me because as a safe adult, you have to learn how to say no. If you can't say no to me, like, who could you say no to? And so I'm teaching my kids all of this stuff and learning about the psychology. And alongside that, I'm like constantly engaging in non-consensual existence, right? Like I can't say no. And that started to get really, really uncomfy for me. This like, I'm feeling trapped in a world where I'm not allowed to say no when everything about how I'm raising my kids is teaching them like, you say no. So that was a really big thread in that with my kids and teaching them to think for themselves. And I thought, well, and then 2 of my kids stopped being religious. And internally, I was cheering them on. And I thought,
At what age? How old were they?
13, 14, and 11.
11 is impressive.
Yeah, this kid is a special kid, but he's also autistic. So for him, he's like, this is bullshit. God in the sky, show me. So he saw through it right away. And then my 14-year-old. And internally I thought, oh my God, get out, go, run as far away as you can. And then I thought, fuck, if that's how I feel, then what am I still doing here? At this point in my journey, I'd already shifted probably to modern Orthodox ideology. I was shifting left and left. So that was a big catalyst. And then my son came out as trans. And I thought, I can't raise my kid in a community where there's going to be any kind of shame around his identity. So that was a permission I needed to say no. That wasn't the final straw, but that was a very big, it pushed it almost to the end of what finally broke.
As a side question out of my own curiosity, was the writing on the wall for your trans son from a young age? Like, did you have the clues there?
Yeah. So he's trans male. So he was born a girl, went to Beis Yaakov, and very much masked, was hyper feminine. When he was 9, he got diagnosed as autistic. Right around that same time, we had moved my big boys out of the super ultra Orthodox school into the modern Orthodox school. And that's a whole other long story. That was actually the most incredible, 2 of the most awful weeks of my life when the entire community converged on us. We got phone calls. We had people sitting us down that we were ruining our children for putting them into an Orthodox school because it was a modern Orthodox school. They're not going to be religious. They're going to talk to boys. They're going to all of this awful, please consider this. And this has been 3 years of agonizing of trying to help our kids. We actually, Rob Berkowitz was family rabbi. At this point, I was done asking rabbis for shit, but my ex was still asking. So we asked him what we should do. And he said, kids who don't do well in the system don't do well in life. So pull them out because they should be mensches first. They should be good people first, which sounded so beautiful, but also maybe the system's broken. So we pulled our kids out. And then he actually called us. Now, for context, Roberto doesn't call anybody. You call his secretary and you get a 3-minute meeting or email communication. Roberto called us to say what is going on. He was getting phone calls from people in the community saying the Rosenthal's went off the deep end. Save them. And he called and he's like, what's going on? They're like, we literally asked you and you said to do this. And he's like, yeah, right, do it. It's the right thing to do. The irony is look where we ended up. So they were all right in their concerns that we would end up not religious. So
It was actually because you didn't straighten your hair in seminary. That was actually
yeah.
That's why.
So a fun follow up to that straightening hair story. I have raging ADHD and I get very impulsive with my hair. So it gets too long and then I chop it. So in 12th grade, I chopped it chin length. And when I got it cut, they straightened it. So I come to school with chin length straight hair. I kid you not, I got texts from friends in different schools within 10 minutes of me showing up at school saying, I heard you cut your hair. Teachers came up to me to congratulate me. They were so proud of me. And I was like, in my sassy, I didn't even have to go to BJJ, which is the super religious seminary to get here. Look at me. So I have this dream of walking back in. I have currently purple hair. It's always different colors with a side shave. I have dreams of walking in and being like, look at me now. Back to my story. So my kid, he was a Beis Yaakov. We had just moved my boys into the modern Orthodox school and he started asking to move. And so I said, for sure. The problem was it's a very small school and there was only boys in that class. And I said, you're going to be the only girl in the class. And he said, I don't care. And I was like, are you sure? And he said, I don't care. So as soon as we decided to make the switch, he asked to shave his head. And 2 months later, we got his autism diagnosis. And I went, oh, sensory overload. He needed a haircut. He's since said to me, I told you sensory, but really I just wanted a boy haircut. And he did really well in that class because he was with a group of boys. So when he came out, it was like, oh, this all makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah.
100%.
I still actively think about the fact that I don't make a blessing every time I pee.
Yes. That took me years. We'll talk more about the timing, but it took me years to get that very instinctive habit out of my system.
I don't need to say it. I just am consciously aware that I don't.
That you're not. Exactly. Yeah. It's it's this urge that is subconscious emerging before anything else happens. Yeah. Well, a few things I want to tie in still. I'm just thinking which next, but let's talk about the stillbirth actually.
Sure. Yeah, it's a hard story. Trigger warning, but it's a story that I love telling because it so beautifully encapsulates the abuse of the system and the incredible community piece that is very alluring to people to join and to stay. And I see both of those threads in the story very strongly. And I think it's just a great way to share what it was that we were a part of. So I was pregnant with baby number 3. Also, at any point, stop me, ask questions or whatever. And Simchas Torah actually is a very fucked up holiday for me. It always was. It's the most male-centered, one of the most male-centered of the holidays, and I never felt connection to it. And then I had my stillborn that holiday. October 7th happened by that holiday. So it's just an all-around shit existent like day in the world for me. So I woke up the morning of Saturday morning. It's a 2-day holiday here in the States. Shabbat like holiday, you're not driving, you're not turning on lights, you're all the things. It's at the end of an 8-day holiday. So I'm exhausted. I'm 8 months pregnant with 2 little boys. And I woke up in the morning and didn't feel movement. So I did the thing. I'm lying on my side. I had my juice, drank juice, and then realized like something's not right. Luckily, we lived across the street from the synagogue. So I was like, okay, got my kids dressed. Go next door, have to find my husband. So I can't go into the synagogue because it's like men only. And go into the women's section, he's not going to see me. So I had to find somebody to go find him and call him, which like just this whole process of not being able to pick up the phone and say, honey, something's wrong was really traumatic, just like from the get-go. So I finally find him. He said, let's go. And I said, I'm not feeling movement. I can't remember the last time I felt movement. He goes, we got to go to the hospital. One of the beautiful things about Orthodox Judaism is how gentle it is. So you're allowed to break any law for potential loss of life if somebody's in danger. And for kids, it's even more minor. If it's a broken arm, you can break the rules. So you can get in a car and drive to the hospital. What the rabbis did in their beautiful wisdom was if they wanted to make sure people went to the hospital, so they said, you're also allowed to drive home. If you get there, you get the cast on, you can drive home so that you're not stuck in the hospital for 24 hours. That way it ensures that people will get medical help. So I knew that if we went to the hospital, regardless of what the outcome was, we'd be able to come home. We decide we're going to go to the hospital, get checked out. We tell the rabbi where we're going. We drop our kids off at our friend's house. We're supposed to go have lunch with them so that we could go to the hospital and they're taken care of. Now, it's a 2-day holiday, which means the holiday's not over until Sunday night, and this is Saturday morning. So we drive to the hospital, we get there, and we get the terrible news that there's no heartbeat. The first thing that I remember thinking was, oh my God, God must think we're so special because he only picks his strongest soldiers to go through this kind of shit. So it was the first time that I felt like deeply valid and loved by God, that he gave me this challenge. Like, I'm good enough, I'm worthy, which is so fucked up. But at the time, I remember feeling like I'm worthy. And we very much believe in like reincarnation and missions for souls. And so sometimes there's souls that just need to come through the world. They don't actually have to live in it. They just have to come through it and then they've completed their mission. So for me, it was like, okay, one of my kids, I can't screw up. Like I helped them achieve their potential and I can't fuck this one up. So that was like a really big narrative of that. Anyway, we find out there's no heartbeat and the doctor sits us down and gives us the options. You can deliver right now, or you can go home and you have up to 2 weeks before it becomes dangerous. It's for you to come back. And at that point, I faced the hardest decision of my life. Nobody should ever have to go through this kind of decision because this was my dilemma. I have a 2- and 3-year-old at friends' houses who I cannot call and communicate with. So I can't call them and tell them we're not coming home. I can't call them and tell them where I am. We can't call our friends and tell them, right? So if we choose to have this baby right now, my children will not be able. So one of 2 things is going to happen. Either my husband stays with me because I need the moral support, and my children don't know anything until 2 days later, and my friends have to just figure out to keep them for 2 days. Or my husband goes home to be with my kids, and I'm by myself and don't have the support that I need, and come home without a baby. Like I was visibly pregnant. My kid knew that there's a baby coming, and come home like. Don't tell the abandonment of like then their mom shows up after 2 days, however many days without a baby, or we both go home. And if we both go home, that means that now there's no more potential danger, right? Because we know that the baby's dead and we know that I don't need to go back. So if I go home, that means that I have to walk around with a dead baby inside me for the next 2 days. Like I can't go back until Monday morning, which is just the position that God put me in that moment is abusive. It's really, really like such a problematic position. So I chose to go home. I chose to center my kids and their needs, and I chose to go home. And I spent 2 days knowing that I was carrying a dead baby because God said. The flip of that was we lived in Minneapolis. Minneapolis is a beautiful community. It's small. It's close-knit. As soon as we got home, the rabbi came in to check on us. They saw the car come into the driveway, came to check on us. And my husband told him what happened. And he immediately went to like the elders of the community, like the women in charge, and said, like, this is what's going on. what's going on. We had been living there for about 1.5 years at that point. So he said, this is what's going on. And they picked the person that I was the closest to, who happened to be, her mother was what they called the dead baby nurse. She was the nurse for people with miscarriages and stillborns. And so she had been around this her whole life. And they sent her over to come talk to me. So she knocked on the door. She said, hi. She sat me down. She said, this is what you're going to go through. This is what you should do. Really, really beautiful, helpful advice. And she said to me, the community has your back in whatever way you need. So if you want to talk to people, you can. If you want to talk through me, you can. Whatever you need. And for 3 weeks, the community carried us in a way that everybody deserves to be carried. They showed up at the hospital with hot homemade food. I didn't want to talk to anybody, so she was my go-to liaison. They grocery shopped. They bought toys for my kid. They took my kids out and took them places. They brought us dinner. And I had to stop it after 3 weeks. And they're like, there's people who want to keep cooking for you. Like, you've got this as long as you need. To the point that the nurses and the doctors in the hospital were like, who are these? Like, who are you? Like, what kind of celebrity are you that people are just like, swarming you? Even down to like, according to Jewish law, the baby gets a circumcision. That baby gets circumcision, which also like, I still can't process that. We had to pick a name for him. And then, so in order to do that, you have to like sign the baby out and all of that has to happen. So we had the mohel, the guy who does circumcisions, and one of the other like wealthy guys in the community. They came by, they took care of all the paperwork, took him into a room. I didn't have to have any part in it. So they really just like carried us and held us. And I think it's one of the most loved I've ever felt in a community around a tragedy like that. And yeah, so to me, it was this, I grieved 10 years later. I found my medical records and I opened it up and I went, holy fuck, that was a trip. Because I didn't grieve because God chose me. This baby didn't need to be here. And the grief for me was having to go through the physical process of it. But the spiritual, it was almost like a spiritual bypass thing that happened where it bypassed my grief and I didn't have a chance to actually grieve it. So 10 years later, I found my after I'd left religion, I found my medical files. I was looking for something and I found the discharge papers and I had a good cry and grieved and went through that process. But that's my story.
Thank you for sharing. How do you reconcile these two such opposing things? Like God fucks you up and then the community of God supports you. It's the classic God taketh away and then God giveth.
Yeah.
Hopefully we're breaking even, but I think we're not.
I think I actually spend a lot of time thinking about this, and I'm sure every single person who's left a high control group has had to go through this. The community piece of it is you don't find community outside of cult the way that you do inside cult. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Inside the cult, it is it's beautiful. People show up for each other. They support each other. All of that sense of like ownership and belonging. Even within that, though, there's a really, really dark side that I saw my entire life, especially being part of the outreach world and watching people become religious and either get accepted or rejected from the community, which is unless they don't like you. If there's something about you that's like a little bit nebbish or a little bit like using that, like the Jewish terminology for nerdy or like a little bit like off the beat or a little bit makes me uncomfortable knowing you exist, you don't get supported the same way. I watched people become religious with money and people without money. And the people with money they don't just get embraced, they become leaders in the community. And the people who don't have money are like the pariahs. They're you're the problem in our communities that you brought secular influence into the world. Like it's actually like painful to watch that process. So when you're on the recipient of this community love, it's so beautiful. And I think because I always saw the underbelly of it, it was easier for me to walk away from than most people that I've gotten to talk to who've left these high control religions have experienced. I think most people, it's a really painful break to walk away from that kind of loving support. So I think for me, like the reconciliation is not as big as for some people because I always saw the underbelly of it. Like I know that what I went through, the way I was carried, would not have been extended to somebody who wasn't as popular as we were.
Yes, absolutely. I have two final questions for you for this like section of it all. I love how in depth we've gone. One is, do you feel like you've touched upon those two parallel cults of Orthodox Judaism and Aish? Is there anything else you want to say about that? Conceptualize it in any way?
Yeah. I think that Orthodox Judaism is the cultiness of it, the group cult. There's no one leader, which was very hard for me to process when I was leaving that it was actually a cult. Because like, where's the guy at the top benefiting? It's a 3,000-year-old cult. It's a brilliant one. I actually believe that monotheism brought cult to the world, this like unchecked, unbalanced one source of power. And so in a sense, we created that. Go Jews, we run the world in all the ways. And it's a very ritualistic, every single piece of your life consumed. It's like aggressive in its cultiness, but it also slightly differs from the traditional, like our traditional view of cult, because it doesn't have the familiar structure that we're looking for. The man at the top and the soldiers and the recruitments and the mission. Aish is that. Aish is a very classic, typical. There was the rise of the cult in the 70s and the 80s, the anti-culture. Rav Noach started Aish in the 70s and the 80s, and he started multiple schools before he got to this one. He has a sales background. He created this mission, and his soldiers, his mission wasn't even to make people religious. His mission was to insert himself into every area of Jewish life and be the man in saving the Jews from that issue, from whether it's honest reporting to the Executive Learning Center bringing in high donors or whatever it is. It's a very classic recruitment cult. And being a part of that machine, I think, is a different kind of mind fuck. Having been grown up in it, having been a keg, what's the term? Like a keg in the cog in the machine.
Oh
Like,
yeah, you're cog in the machine. Exactly. Yeah.
Just being on that, the moral injury. I was actually talking to somebody today. We're talking about Nexium, which is, if anybody knows, go watch the show The Vow. It breaks it all down. It's literally the Aishiest thing I've ever seen. I started watching that show and I thought, oh my God, this is Aish. This is what I was a part of. This ethical living.
Best self. Bring out your best
self, human empowerment, like growth-oriented, all of that stuff. And so I was telling her, I'm just now starting to deconstruct, having been a perpetrator. And I was saying, unlike in Nexium, in this cult, there was actual like human like branding on flesh branding. And I said, I didn't brand anybody's flesh. She goes, yeah, but you branded their minds. And I thought, fuck. So that piece of it is, it's a totally different, like in the Orthodox world, you're living your own little world. You're really not trying to get anybody in. It's a very insular world. It's a very, in fact, I used to take issue with the Orthodox world being like, you have God's truth. Why aren't you sharing it with the world? And they're like, no, they're going to negatively influence my kids. And I thought, how dare you like keep this to yourself? On the flip side, like, good, keep it to yourself. But Aish is the opposite of that. It's the go fight God's fight. I call it, it's a missionary. It's the evangelical arm. It's the recruitment cult arm.
Yeah, and it like really built atop whatever fuckery. It had some redeeming qualities. I think there was more exposure to the outside world.
Right.
But as in it offset. If I'd grown up purely Orthodox Jewish without Aish, may have actually taken me longer to leave because of, definitely was less resource, ironically, in this go out there into the world and recruit thing.
Yeah. Just one more thing to finish that off is that Aish is its own religion. Like I said, I was an Orthodox Jew, but I spent the majority of my life in secular, in the greater Jewish community, and interacted with great like Jews that weren't Orthodox. And when we left Aish, before I left religion, but when we left Aish, we were like, oh, we better have a social, like we should probably have a social life, because like our entire social life was Aish. So we started making friends with Orthodox couples, and I was like, what religion are you a part of? Like, Torah and science do go together, and like dinosaurs did exist, and like it was just like a completely different viewpoint. And I thought, I don't relate to Orthodox people, and that's when I started shifting to modern Orthodoxy.
Yeah. So it really did its own brand. It had modern Orthodox components. It really was just whatever.
Zionists, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They had Zionist undertones, which was my final question to you was, how do you compare, and maybe this is somewhat arbitrary, but there seems to be two main old men rabbis in this arc. And the first one is Noah Weinberg, who founded the cult, and then Rabbi Yitzhak Berkowitz, who is actually the current CEO of Aish HaTorah, but who's also the person who ordained a lot of us, including me, and who was more involved in your adult life, because he died probably when you were like 20 or something like that.
Noah Weinberg? No,
Weinberg.
No, yeah, in my 20s. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you conceptualize each of these individuals?
So I think Noah Weinberg was I see like there's two types of people who are in a cult. There's the people who would do this anyway, and then there's the people who are only doing it because they're indoctrinated, which is like a really big thing that I'm kind of pulling on that thread. Again, back with Nexium because it's in the news again, but one of the biggest perpetrators, Allison Mack, she was on Smallville, a famous actress. She was his, like, Keith Raniere's right-hand man, the head of this cult's right-hand man, and she helped the branding, like, she perpetrated that. And the head of the cult got 127 years. Very amazing. It's amazing how you still think in numbers and, like, significance.
Yeah.
So he got life in jail because he would have done this on his own. Like, he did this on his own. He created this. Alison Mack would never have done this if she wasn't indoctrinated by this evil. I think Noah Weinberg he set out on a mission to create this actively. Whether he was acting from good place, he left the way that he grew up. He was a thinker in that. He grew up Hasidic and he left that world, but he was proactive in this mission and he wanted to stick his finger in every corner. And like I said, it wasn't even about making Jews religious. So I don't even think it was about God. It feels very much like it was about power. Whereas Reb Berkowitz feels like a good man who's deeply indoctrinated. Like I said in the story where he said women should have some autonomy, like he's very controversial in his thinking, which makes him more dangerous, by the way, because he can convince people in ways that are very compelling. But as a person, I think, just from you're asking my own opinions, I think he's much more of a deeply indoctrinated good person who is accidentally a perpetrator.
That's fair. One anecdotal
And I
thing
know there's people who will disagree with me, which is obviously fine.
obviously, yeah, that's fine. For my own knowledge, I've tried to piece together Noah Weinberg's youth, and I couldn't figure it out. And I was wondering if you happen to know two things about him that I'm very curious about that Wikipedia won't tell me.
Yeah.
One is, what was he selling when he was a salesperson? Physically,
I don't know.
Yeah, it's really strange. And the other one, he apparently...
Because the lore around it, and then it was confirmed with me at Wikipedia, but this is what I grew up with, was he went around from house to house and found out and saw that Jews weren't connected to their Judaism.
Exactly.
I would not be surprised if he was involved in some kind of MLM, multi-level marketing.
Really? All the way back then?
Because it's very culty.
And because he literally structured his entire organization.
Yeah, and he went door to door. So now I'm going to have to go pull that thread. Now I'm
if you can find that out for me,
Yeah.
I'm not connected enough. And then my other question is very similar. Supposedly he had a bachelor's degree at least from some Loyola in Baltimore or something like that.
Yeah.
And I've always been very curious, how the fuck did he get a bachelor's degree and what was it in? Because
They all did. Reb Berkowitz, I think, also was educated. Did he go to university?
I don't know.
I don't know, but he used to wear yellow shirts. Like, they all have these do as I say, not as I do backgrounds.
Oh, I did it and it's not worth it.
Yeah, you don't worry about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually
okay.
think one of the biggest myths in the outreach world is that all of those rabbis should go to business school. They would be so much more effective if they all got business degrees, because they're all running literal corporations and they're shit at it.
So you're saying they should?
If they want to be more effective, it's a miss. It's a miss on their part. They should all go to
That's a
the
miss.
rabbis should go to
Okay.
business school.
That's fair.
Don't. Yeah, if they want to be more successful, that always confused
That's
me why
right.
they didn't do that.
I used to think that to be involved in nonprofit means you had to be poor. I've,
Yeah.
in retrospect, learned that is not the case. You can
No.
actually be a very profitable nonprofit.
Yeah.
It's just that the ones we were involved in were particularly
poor.
ineffective.
Because they
and
didn't know
badly
what
run.
they were doing. Yeah, because nobody went to
exactly.
business school. You got
Yeah.
cure of training and then sent out. And the difference there was always this rivalry between the other evangelical branches, Chabadich.
Yeah.
They were incredibly more successful because they were assigned and don't come home. Like, they were sent places and it was literally like do or die. And so the scrappiness of the Chabad is really because they can't fail. Versus Aish, it's like you get to choose where you want to work and you want to start the branch and you don't and it closes. It's not the same thing. You can go do something else after.
The moral of the story, it's not a good enough cult. It could do better.
Yeah, it could do much better.
Chabad is the next level cult, so we can be
Yeah.
grateful for that. All right, shifting a little bit, shifting from a lot of, I think we've dove really deep into a lot of your arc, and let's start moving towards the deconstruction. I know you've already mentioned a big part of what that was. So any final things about deconstruction towards the real unraveling? What's it been like on the other side? Not really yet the healing. We could talk about that too.
Sure. But what the real break was?
If there was a specific moment,
Yeah.
obviously, yeah. And then what have the days and weeks and months since looked like?
So there was a couple of moments of break and of rationalization that I did in order to leave. I'll tell you the break stories and then I'll go around. I said I don't like linear, so I'll prove it to you now. When I was in marriage therapy at the end of, like, after my marriage fell apart, the therapist said, if you have an attachment to outcome, you can't properly objectively engage in that topic, because your brain is always going to get you to an outcome. And for me, there was 2 outcomes that were never up for debate. Religion, my belief in God, and my marriage. Because my marriage was not, there was no abuse. Like it wasn't gangrene, right? I was taught that marriage is like 2 hands, and the only time you cut off your hand is if it's killing you. My marriage wasn't killing me. Fun fact, I was suicidal and clinically depressed. So it was killing me. It just wasn't like, I wasn't being beat. So it wasn't, it didn't seem like that was killing me. I also didn't realize that it was my marriage was part of what was making me so depressed. Because for all intents and purposes, we had a good marriage in terms of the structure of it. We communicated, all the things. And religion, I had this like intellectual proof of God. So like, if it's true, then whether I like it or not, I'm going to keep it. So divorce got put on the table, not by me. The word divorce, like actively, like maybe divorce. And for the first time, the attachment to outcome went away, and it like crumbled within 12 hours, which was fascinating to me. Are you still there? Yeah. So that crumbled within 12 hours. And once that crumbled, I thought,
I am, yeah.
well, if I'm allowed to leave this, what else am I allowed to leave? And then I needed some space. So I reconnected with my high school best friend who had left religion first. She was divorced and she was conservadox at this point. So we went away for a couple days together, and I said, oh my God, if I get divorced, I never have to go to the mikveh ever again. And she looked me dead in the eye and said, you still never have to go to the mikveh ever again. And I said, no, but like I do. And she goes, no, you're allowed to want whatever you want. And I went, like that just blew my mind. And so I said, okay, I'm never going to the mikveh again. And so when I came back and I said, should we go to therapy? Let's try to figure this out. I said, but you need to know I'm never going to the mikveh ever again. So whatever that means for you religiously, like you got to know this ahead of time. So that was like that's the bath at the end of those 7 days, which is its own fuckery. But yeah, to come back together. So meaning the whole process of Nita, like I was not going to do the checks. I was not going to dunk. Like I'm going to get my period and move on with my life. Like that was just going to be the fact. And so that was a really, really powerful for me to be like, child. Sorry, one second. Can't. Sorry about that.
You think that was very powerful for you?
So that was a very powerful moment. That was a moment of I'm allowed to choose what I want. So even though at that point I still believed in God, I thought, okay, God, I'm not okay. And if you really love me, at this point I was pretty sure that he was not a good thing. Because also at some point I was a parent coach, and I was very specific about which clients I would take, because I wanted parents that if there was an issue, took themselves to therapy, go figure out how to be a better person, not your kid. There's nothing wrong with your kid. And I realized that not only would I not take on God as a client, but I would call CPS on him. And so I still thought he was real, but I didn't like him. And so I thought, okay, at this point, like once you said you can do whatever you want, I thought, okay, God, if you really love me, this is your chance. I need to do this in order to be okay. I got to walk away from this trap that I'm in. That was one really important break for me. And then a whole bunch of months later, I was sitting with my uncles, my gay uncle, who I mentioned at the beginning, and his husband, who are wonderful people. And we were talking about certain characters in my story that were religious that I maybe had some beef with. And I just had this epiphany, and I thought, I don't even like these people. Why am I working so hard to spend eternity with them? My uncles are the coolest people I know, and they're going to the depths of hell because they're gay. So what sins do I need to commit to spend eternity with them? So I still believed there was an afterlife at that point, but I made peace with the fact that I wanted to be a sinner. So those were three really pivotal moments in my finally giving myself permission to say fuck no.
Nice. When you say disconnecting from outcomes, am I interpreting that correctly to mean as in you don't have to be a very specific way? Like there's a given that you have to be a certain way, and therefore line up your life around that because that's the only option. And suddenly it's actually, no, it doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah, we have certain attachments to outcome. I need to own my own house. Or we have certain things that we decide for ourselves that are like truths. And then once we decide those are givens, then everything we do is to make that fit. So if I believe in God, God is true, I'm going to choose to live my life based on that outcome versus I'm allowed to say no to that.
So outcome here is not outcome of action so much as outcome of state,
Yes.
Outcome of a logical equation. A plus B equals God exists.
Whatever brings you to that conclusion, right? Or the marriage thing. I'm not going to get divorced because it's not gangrene. So I'm staying married. So whenever I poked at my marriage or considered thinking about it, it was always from the lens of how do I make this work? Not do I want to be here? And as soon as
Right.
as soon as I could say, do I want to be here? It like literally fell apart. That I think that's an outcome can be so many different things for different people.
Yeah. So what does your life look like now? And my main question around that is emotionally now. Like, what's been the rebuilding process for you broadly and maybe specifically? I know you mentioned you're deconstructing the whole being a
Yeah.
perpetrator part of it. Tell me about that kind of a bit of the healing arc,
So
sense
I
making.
spent most of my life wishing I didn't exist. I didn't understand what the point of being here was. I remember as a very little kid, I asked my mom, how come all the non-Jews didn't just commit suicide? Not because they shouldn't be here, but because the only reason I was here is because there was like an afterlife that I had to earn. And if they don't have that attachment to the afterlife, then like, why are they bothering? Like, why are we here? My mother since has said that she wished that she could have heard that for what it was at the time. And I appreciated that. So I just lived my whole life in fear of the afterlife. Everything that I did was in make sure I don't live in shame and guilt for eternity, because the Jewish version of hell is actually much worse than burning. You just get to live with the shame of your inaction or your bad action. And so by the time I left, I was incredibly depressed, and the suicide ideation, I used to daydream about getting hit by a car or getting cancer, and because I just needed out. I've since found, it's funny because I think that I've yet to meet like people I think actually you might be the closest to this, of people that I met who've left where the lack of meaning is very empty and very hard to reconcile. For me, I found the most incredible healing in knowing that there's no point, like nothing actually matters. The lack of meaning has given me the tremendous freedom in being able to say like, well, if nothing matters, I can just live how I want. I can just exist. I can just be. I can be a hedonist and live in pleasure and eat all the things and fuck all the things and do all the things. Like there's just there's nobody telling me that this has to be, right? There's literally no more attachment to any outcome. Nothing matters. We're all going to die at the end, so you might as well enjoy the ride. As I was going through the process and struggling with the push and pull, my therapist kept saying to me, what does your body feel? Follow your body, which was a very powerful thing to be told after having been told my whole life, ignore your body, ignore what your inner works are telling you. And my body, every time I moved away from religion and my marriage, my body was calm. And so I followed that. And today, I lived with debilitating anxiety and clinical depression. And today I would say that I really don't struggle with either very much. I live very, very much in the present because it's the only thing that exists. Is this exact given moment. And if I'm safe in this moment, then I can have fun in it and be okay. And then prepare for the next moment to be okay in the next moment is how I live my life now.
Yeah.
But
So
yeah.
how do you conceptualize your past from the place that you stand now? And I know you've been touching upon that throughout, but that broad top of the mountain
Yeah.
looking backwards thing.
That's Woody. Can you fine tune that question?
I generally wouldn't, but I guess I'll dive in a little bit deeper into, I wasn't angling specific this, but I'll ask this. When you reflect about the past, the fact that you were in a leadership capacity for
Yeah.
so long, how is that for you?
I think the first step, like I said, this is the next step of my deconstruction. Because at this point, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in any of it. I would identify as, I live in the I don't know. There's more that we don't know than that we do know. And I'm very comfortable with, they talk about the idea of like the God of the gaps. When we don't know something, we go, oh, it's God. It's magic. And I'm in the, we don't know. We'll figure it out or we won't. But I'm very comfortable with the I don't know. In terms of being somebody who pulled people in, there's actively people who are super religious, generations of religious Jews because of my input. I'm starting to deconstruct that. But the first step for me has been realizing that two things. One, that I was a victim of indoctrination. I was born into something that I didn't ask for. And these were beliefs that I didn't stand a chance against. And the other side is somebody once asked me, somebody who was in Scientology, who joined Scientology as an adult and left as an adult. And he said, when people leave cults, some of the healing they do is go back to who you were before. He goes, but you don't have a before. So what do you do with that? And for me, it's been this process of finding the before within it and seeing my who I was throughout this whole thing, finding my humanity in it, where I pushed back on it. Spent years, I love patterns. I see the world in patterns. So I spent years looking at the outreach pattern and pointing out the flaws, where it worked, where it didn't work, why it worked, that, oh, you prey on the vulnerable people are the ones who join. Why is that? Oh, because they don't have community. The people who have the money that don't have the money. So I stayed in it as long as I did, even after it was uncomfortable, because I felt like these people deserve to have somebody who cares about them and not the fact that they're a number. So I'm going to care about the poor people, and I'm going to care about the people who are not cool and influencers, and like finding my inherent humanity within everything that I did has been incredibly comforting, that this is not something I would have chosen for myself.
Yeah. The combination of you really were thrown into this from the youngest age and told to do
Yeah.
this. You were handed a
Yeah.
gun. And then the fact that despite all that, you were constantly, to the degree that you could, checking in with your own
Yeah.
values and trying to be as ethical
Yes.
as you could about
Yeah.
it. And that is commendable and is not visible in the behaviors of the founders and the
No.
behaviors of so many of the
No.
people who are there. And ultimately, I would venture, and this is me stepping
Sure.
outside a little bit of this, but I would venture that is ultimately why you left.
Yeah.
Like your moral compass could only stand so much
Yeah.
shit, and so there's the indoctrination. But eventually, you couldn't.
I couldn't tolerate it.
You couldn't ignore it
A
anymore.
big
Yeah,
two big
exactly.
things that happened in the Orthodox world that really were catalysts also for me leaving were the aguna issue. Aguna is when a woman is refused to divorce, her ex refuses to give her a divorce, and these women stay chained. My cousin was an aguna for 2 years in the state of Israel, where civil and religious divorce are intertwined. So it's even crazier that it happened there. And the way that they found it out for men, but not for women, just completely threw me. And then I don't know if you know about this crazy scandal that happened in New York. Pella is the Jewish first responder organization. And women in New York is the biggest concentration of Jews, I think, outside of Israel. Women were very uncomfortable with needing to call their neighbors to come pick them off the floor of the shower or deliver a baby, or in these complete states of immodesty, and then have to face their friend's husband the next day at synagogue. That's just such a mindfuck. So they started this organization called Ezras Nashim, which means Help for Women, which is a female first responder organization. And they got so much pushback from Hatzalah. They got taken to court. And when they lost the case, Hatzalah lost the case against this female organization. These are all religious women, by the way, right? Saying we want to help women be modest. After they lost the case, they sent out this, everybody, let's just prank them. And they kept their resources tied up by pranking them with emergencies. And I saw that and I thought, this is wrong. This is just, there's nothing godly about this. There's nothing good about this. There's nothing human about this. This is literally just a play for power. And yes, I think you're right that I just saw, I just couldn't handle seeing people be not decent.
Yeah, 100%. You have a unique way of seeing the world, and I think very unconventional, even amongst those who've left.
Yeah.
And I'm particularly curious about the question of what would your advice be for somebody else who's leaving, as an influencer of spiritual.
My advice, I have a couple pieces of advice. The first one is be gentle with yourself. Take it slow. You see all these people who've left and their stories, and there's this drive to try to find where you fit into that narrative. And no two people's stories are the same. Everybody has a different pathway. Yeah, just be gentle with this stuff. You don't have to leave all the way. You don't have to become an atheist. You don't have to, you can be, I obviously think you should, but that's taking a step back from culty recruitment. But be gentle with yourself and your journey. Read. I know everybody says this, and I'm going to read, listen to podcasts, listen to what other people's experiences were from your own group, but also other groups. I think for me, the thing that was the most healing was seeing that there was nothing special about my version of religion. It was the same exact pattern of every single other coercive control, to the point that I didn't ever have to find, I was going to sit down and work through the proofs of God that I have and see if I could disprove them. And ultimately I didn't have to do that because I saw this symmetry in every other story. And I thought, we're not special. This is literally a formula of coercive control. Stephen Hassan, the bite model, was incredibly powerful for me to see that and fit it into this is 1 + 1 = 2 people.
The bite model of how to analyze a cult.
What is a cult? The bite model is the 4 categories, the 4 areas where they control behavioral, information, emotional, and thought. How much control is in those spaces, and then seeing that. So Learn, Read, Understand Cultish is an incredible book about language that I highly recommend by Amanda. I can't remember her last name. I'm happy to give you a resource list. I think you have that. The other thing that I would do, we need support. You need support in this. This is not something that should be going out alone. A therapist is a great thing. Finding other people who've left coercive control, specifically yours, is always good. There's so many Facebook pages, and read Chelmsfield's everything, listen to this podcast. But searching out and finding people who've had your shared experience that you have somebody to like shit talk with is really healing. And in terms of finding support and community, everybody laments, especially in the world that we live in, that finding a community is really, finding people is hard. Finding friends as an adult is fucking hard. So the two pieces of advice that I would give, one is virtual online is a much easier space to find people. Do that. But we also need in-person support. So what I did was I looked at like, is there a model for how to create connection? Human connection. What's the model? And the model is dating, right? Literally, like when you go on the dating sites, people date for a social life. Like there's so many people out there who have no friends. And when they want to socialize, they go on the dating apps and they find somebody to go hang out with. So I thought, okay, well, if dating is the model, let me just apply that to friendship. And I did not want to date at the beginning. I wanted to build friendship, and I treated it like dating. If I had an interaction with somebody that I thought was cool, I was like, hey, can I have your number? Can we be friends? And then I would follow up and invite them for coffee. And it was hard work, but I approached it the same way I would pursue a romantic partnership, and it worked. I now have one of the most beautiful, I just recently was on a party bus with my friends for 2 of their birthdays, and it was my turn to give a toast. And I said, this is the least lonely I've ever felt in my life. I feel the most supported, even having been married, having grown up in a family with siblings. Like this was a moment where I've dated enough friends that I created a community of support around me. And I think that that's advice I haven't heard from people, and it really worked well for me.
I love that. I'm trying to think if there was anything I was going to ask you on top of that. I'm blanking. So in the meantime, the question I usually like to wrap up with is, do you have anything that you want to ask me?
Do I have anything I want to ask you? Was there anything about this conversation that was, because I know this was you said there was some things about this interview that you hadn't had a chance to do. Did you get what you wanted?
Absolutely. I would say this has been one of my favorites, and I hope this doesn't insult everyone who I've interviewed until now. And I think it could be, there's a level of granularity that we went into in this interview that I really appreciate. I was thinking that I could probably do that more with other people, but it came very naturally for you. You approached this whole conversation and said, I want to talk about this, that, the other in a very detailed way. And I think the devil's in the detail, and we all love the devil, right? And so I think it adds a whole level of clarity, like a window into the world. And it's not just the broad strokes, which I oftentimes suffice myself with, but it's like Clockwork Orange style, we're going to look at the shit like full on. And I think there's something really useful about that.
Yeah, I agree.
To create the empathy for people who don't get it, to really deconstruct what we're looking at, the evils that are here. I think it's really valuable. And you actually do have a very linear way of going through things, despite what you might say. And then I think talking to somebody who is so familiar, and you and I have like crazy parallels in how we see the world and the things we've been through, both. And then the cult we were raised in, it's almost like, I was thinking, wow, it's but then I think it's there's a self-selecting experience here, both in the types of people who ended up in the cult, at the age that we both grew up, in the environment that we were both in, that it's not surprising that we ended up the way we are, right? If Noah Weinberg was able to attract a disproportionate number of neurodivergent people, which I believe he did, and they went and each had a ton of children and were all shitty parents, because shitty parents are the kinds of people who get attracted to cults. And then those types of deep feeling neurodivergent children grow up and reject it, you end up with these really cool parallels, which I love. And that's why I think we should start our own cult.
Yeah, it's funny because when I first, within like a year after I left, I thought, oh my God, I better not. I like had this like legitimate fear that I was going to start a cult, that I was going to accidentally be a cult leader. And I think one of the healing pieces of this, also why you asked me at the beginning about coming on this podcast, I think one of the healing things for me, and this is the start of it, is to be able to use that skill set to do the opposite of start a cult, is to help people think for themselves, critical thinking, trust your own gut, don't listen to me. I tell people all the time now, this is my story. Don't listen to me in terms of use me as somebody, like use my story to help you figure out your own. But don't listen to what I say. Like don't apply what I did to you because we're different people. That I hope that
I
made
love
sense what I was trying to say.
Yeah, perfect. I remember the technical thing. How long would you define yourself as being out now at this point?
So I tell people that I responsibly blew up my life in March of 21. So it's almost 6 years now.
6 years.
That was when I gave myself permission to walk away. How long? And it was probably a year later when I was like, oh, God's not real.
Yeah. Everyone has their arc. I resonate with the last thing you said about the fear of starting a cult. My biggest fear was the fear of being a shitty parent.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's apparent in my writing. I was like, my dad was so bad. Both my parents were so bad that I live in terror of fucking up. I stare at my weaknesses as a parent in the
Yeah.
face, like in horror. And I don't have any parenting model to me, so I don't even have a basis to go
Yeah.
on. So I know I want to be a good parent, but I have no point of reference.
Yeah.
And what I tell myself, I think, is very similar. I preach one of the points I preach when I'm working with clients and stuff like that is the thing you fear won't come true. If you really are afraid of something, it's never that thing that goes wrong. Everything else goes wrong all around it. But if you're afraid of a thing, then that usually means that you're already doing the things to make sure it's not happening. You're aware of it. I say people who are worried about being bad parents are better parents. It's our parents thought they were great parents. That was exactly the problem. They thought they were doing just fine. And so if you have an area where you're afraid of, you're probably already taking the steps and you're already thinking about it. And if you're afraid of starting a cult, you're the least likely.
I always say that your kids are going to end up in therapy because of you, but not for the things you think.
I love that.
But yeah, if you want to talk parenting afterward, that's one of my favorite topics I would say that I probably have a master's in parenting at this point in the process that I went through and in what my goal as a parent is. My entire goal as a parent is to create an unconditionally safe space for my kids to figure out who they are. I'm just a vessel there for them. And if they eat Fruit Loops for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 3 years in a row, like that's not the thing that's going to hurt them. It's not good for their teeth, but creating a safe space for them to process who they are and being that unconditional love. Unconditional love means unconditional acceptance also.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Amazing, Michelle. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
For sharing in some detail.
Yeah, this is fun.
Yeah. Good to have you. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Belief. If you found the episode inspiring, please share it with others who might benefit from it. And be sure to subscribe to it to get updates about future episodes.